Greetings. The other day I picked up this scope. It's a BK Precision model number 1479A, 30 meg oscilloscope, analog of course. And lately I've decided to patronize local retailers a little more. And I needed some resistors, so I went to my favorite electronics store, which I hadn't been to in quite some time, but things seem to lighten up a little bit with COVID, and people are wearing masks there, so I went in, bought my resistors, and then the owner came out, whom I've known for a long time, but I hadn't seen in a long time, and he said, "I got something in the back you may be interested in." And he showed me this guy. It was filthy. Well, it was very dirty. It was rusty, and we plugged it in, and we couldn't really get it to do anything. Spent some time with it. He didn't have any probe, so I couldn't hook it up to the calibration signal or anything, but basically what happened is we turned it on, let it sit for a while, let it warm up, and pretty much nothing happened. Turned all the dials and knobs, and I thought we got a peep out of the screen at one point, but I couldn't replicate it, so it was really totally unclear to me what state this was in. And the only thing I was able to do with it, if you took the time base and you moved it to the XY setting, I got a dot. So what does that mean? Well, the high voltage is working, and they're trying the offsets, the position ones. Remember, this is in XY mode, so when turning channel 2 position, it moves it horizontally, and when turning channel 1 position, it moves it vertically. So that told me that the vertical and horizontal amps seem to be in good shape, but everything pointed at the sweep circuit. It wasn't moving the dot. Anyway, with that said and done, the owner just wanted to get rid of it, quoted me a ridiculously low price, and off, and it came home with me. The first thing I did on it was, because of the dirt, is I cleaned it up. I mean, it wasn't a deep cleaning, but I cleaned it up as best as I could, got rid of a lot of the rust. You can probably still see some rust here. This was probably the worst spot here. And I wire wheeled it here, but I could not get the rust off. This is deep rust, but it cleaned up relatively well. There were some spots on the side. Over here, this was rusty, and I wire wheeled all of that clean, and maybe I'll do a full resto job on this and repaint the case. Not. But I've known these scopes, and they're great bench scopes, great starter scopes, and they're really fantastic for technicians' work, where not a lot of, in cases where there's not a lot of accuracy required, but you just want to see what does the signal look like. You have something that generates video, but it's not working. You probe the video signals with this, and you can immediately tell if it's generating sync, RGB, and all of that good stuff. So this was something I wanted to fix. To a limit, of course. It depended on what the problem is and how long it would take me. But anyway, after cleaning it up, and then playing around a little bit more with the controls, I found something interesting. At this point, I was suspecting that there was something wrong with the sweep circuit. And what I noticed was the triggering, when this knob is pushed in, it's in manual. So you set the trigger level by turning this knob. The knob was extremely difficult to turn, and it says pull auto. So what that means is that the sweep circuit will always run, there's nothing for it. It'll auto trigger, And except, of course, when there is a valid signal in there, it'll use that to trigger. But if there's nothing that has enough amplitude to trigger it, it'll just run, which means that pretty much every other scope you turn on, you'll see a trace. Well, we can't see a trace here, so what could it be? Well, I couldn't pull this knob out. The pull out, I mean, it was really difficult to turn, to rotate, but it was impossible to pull this thing out. And anything short of using pliers or removing the plastic knob and then using vice grips or something, but I didn't want to go that far. Obviously, there was something wrong with this control, so that needed to be investigated a little more. And then I discovered this. Having the time base set really low, I was just moving levers and doing things, and of course now it won't do it for me. There. Look at that. It did a single trace. And then it stops. And if we do both traces, and turn this one away a little bit, so switching. Gave it a single trigger. So whatever happens when you're switching here, whatever circuitry it goes through, that was able to trigger it. So the sweep circuit is working. The auto sweep circuit is not working. That's the conclusion I came to at this point, except I couldn't invoke the auto sweep because I couldn't get this knob out. Now if we turn up the time base, and again I'm just going to hit another button. If you watch closely, when I hit the button, you can see both traces appear briefly. What that means is it's basically showing you a single cycle, a single sweep. So if I turn the time base to a longer period, you can actually see it work. All right. So now we know that everything seems to work except the auto trigger. And of course the biggest clue we have, this button seems to be, the functionality of this button, the mechanical functionality as well as the electrical functionality, doesn't seem to be working very well. So we had to clean controls. I opened it up, I looked at it, and they're really, I mean, fortunately these pots, I mean, this basically is a pot with a switch piggybacked on it, and they were not sealed. So what I had to do was find for an opening in the case and then clean that. I did not want to take this thing apart. They're really not made to be taken apart or to get circuit boards out, which you have to do in order to get to the controls. And so I had to find an easier way to do this, and I didn't even use the contact cleaner. I used this, a solution bottle with a long tip and 91% alcohol. It's, yeah, I should be using 99% or 99.9%, but it's still pretty difficult to find. So we have to make do with 91%. So what I did was I sat there for an hour, looked at every pot from behind, and whenever it had an opening somewhere or a hole, I sprayed it with this. And I mean, I bathed it with this. There was just stuff dripping out of the scope, and every hole I found, every opening that was near a control, including these the switches, got drenched with this stuff. I damn near used the whole bottle of this, and then I let it sit overnight. Fast forward, it's the next day, and I come back. It's still acting this way, except now I was not only able to turn this control, we're still, see there, it's almost like we passed the trigger there and it triggered a single trace, but I could not get a continuous trace out of it. But then the part that says pull auto, now it's messing with me. So what I did was not only, I don't know exactly, I mean, I obviously freed the on-off portion of this switch so you could pull it out with semi-reasonable force, but I probably cleaned the pot and the switch itself too in the back. And we got two clean traces now. You can move them up and down without jumping or fuzziness or anything like that. You can change the horizontal position of the trace. Pretty much everything. So far, it was a no parts required fix. Well, unless of course you consider the IPA I put into this as a part, but it isn't. It's really a shop supply, so no parts yet. So now let's see if we can actually give it a signal and see what that looks like. But before we continue, one of the interesting features of this is, notice that there is no trace rotation control on the front panel anywhere. There isn't any inside, there isn't any anywhere. I had to read up on it, and basically what you got to do here is, this is worth seeing, so you got to loosen two screws here, this and this. And this is basically attached to the yoke of the CRT. And in order to change the trace rotation, you got to manually rotate this till it's fine, and then tighten those screws again. So, come back here. That looks pretty straight. I guess we can bring this down a little bit. But so I grab this and I turn it, and it turns the yoke in either direction, and that's how you straighten out the traces. So, and then of course, take a Phillips head screwdriver, you go in the back, and you tighten those screws, and there you have it. Okay, time to see a signal. I dug out a probe, and coincidentally, it's a BK Precision probe. Did not come with the scope, but I guess this is a leftover I still had from a BK scope that I owned many years ago. So we're going to go into channel A. And clip on to the calibration signal, which is 1 kilohertz, 0.5 volts peak to peak. And let's make sure we're AC coupled. Our trigger source is channel A. We are showing both traces, and let's see, trace A is set to ground, so we flip it up to AC. And there's our square wave signal. And notice that every division Every horizontal division is 0.5 milliseconds, so a whole cycle takes 1 millisecond, which is 1 over 1 kilohertz. So actually the calibration of this is pretty good too. It's got a fine tune here, but when it's full right, that is what it's doing. So that part seems to work pretty well. Now let's test channel B, and for that we put this one back on ground, this one on AC, put the signal in here, and we get this ugly thing happening. We have to put the trigger source here. One thing that I found is even though I cleaned all the pots and switches, this one didn't get cleaned well enough. So play with it a little bit, and there's your channel B signal. So that seems to work well. So it looks like this thing is pretty functional, but we've only looked at square waves, so maybe it would work better if we put in a sinusoid and see what that looks like. So let's give it something in the sinusoid range. What I have here is an amplitude modulated sine wave that we're going to put on channel 1. But in order for that to sync correctly, we got to set the trigger source to channel A. And there you go. Now the funny thing is it won't, even though that is supposed to be at a frequency of 1 kilohertz, the sine wave, it doesn't sync. Let's see, is it the amp? It doesn't, the channel 2 doesn't sync to it. So syncing is still a little bit iffy on it. I'm in manual now. Probably because it's amplitude modulating. So let's see what happens when we turn the modulation off. Took the modulation off and it's still not syncing. And first thinking that there was still something wrong with this, but after thinking about it for a few seconds, of course it's not going to sync because the calibrate output here and the function generator output, even though they're running at the same frequency, they're not synced. Since they're not synced, it's never going to be able to trigger one trace off the other one, even at the same frequency, because they are starting at different points in time. So by turning this knob, I can get channel 2 to sync, or not. Well, if I set the source to channel 2, then channel 2 syncs, but channel 1 won't. And if I set the source back to channel 1 and adjust it, still being a bit fidgety here, but come on. Well, we probably still got dirt in here. There you have it. So the controls are not fully cleaned yet. I may have to put something a little stronger in there than IPA, But generally the scope works. And so the controls are still a bit fidgety, but it seems to work. Needs a better cleaning of the controls, but again, this will make a fine addition to the benchtop for quick and dirty checking of activity that cannot be properly detected by a logic probe. As a matter of interest, there's a sticker on here, and this received its last calibration on the 21st of June 1995, and it's due for a recall for the calibration in June of 1996. So there you have it, a no parts required repair. Sorry if it was boring, but you know, sometimes you can sit there and analyze circuits all day long. If one of the switches or pots is bad, you're not going to get anywhere. So to sum it up, it's pretty much fixed. I got to do more deep cleaning on the controls, and one other thing very annoying about this is that it's so caked with dirt on the inside. Once things heat up, it starts cooking that covering, which doesn't smell very good, but I can happily inform you that it's getting better. The smell is getting less, so whatever's on there is cooking off, and I will be able to use it without having to wear a mask. At least I don't have to wear a mask in my own basement. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next time.